verse 3. Could we with ink the ocean fill, and were the skies of parchment made, were every stalk on earth a quill, and every man a scribe by trade, to write the love of God above, would drain the ocean dry, nor could the scroll contain the whole, though stretched from sky to sky. Oh, love of God, how rich and pure, how measureless and strong, it shall forevermore endure. The saints and angels' song. Let's sing that one more time. Oh, love of God, how rich and pure, how measureless and strong, it shall forevermore endure. The saints and angels' song.
On sound? Oh, there we go. Welcome to the Maundy Thursday service this year. Holy Week began a few days ago on Palm Sunday when our children took these palm branches and paraded around on that very ironic Sunday. A Sunday that John kind of admitted it's a hard one. It's a hard one for all of us, especially it's a hard one sometimes for kids as we begin this Holy Week, this march towards the cross and towards resurrection. And so tonight you've gathered together in this space for our Maundy Thursday service. I hope it's a special time together. It's always a fun little quaint group, all of us disciples gathered around this table tonight, and an opportunity to wash our hands and our feet, if you would so desire, later on in the service. In these moments, we're going to have a chance to welcome one another with grace and hospitality of Christ. If you would like to not greet one another, you can go ahead and either take a seat or maybe use the restroom. We've got a men's restroom over here and a women's restroom over there. But if you would like maybe not to greet one another, you can take a seat or use the restroom during this time. But if you'd like to greet one another in love and hospitality and grace, you are free to do that during these moments. And we're looking forward to it. I want to make sure to all of our littles, if you are under the age of 70 tonight, you have coloring sheets over here. If you are over the age of 70, there's also coloring sheets for you. And so back behind me at those tables where you see George and Hazel right now, there are 6 different coloring sheets if you would like to color tonight, and some crayons. It is for all ages. In fact, someone who came in, I think my friend Brad said, well, maybe if I get bored during the sermon part, I would really like to color. So it is free for everyone to grab some crayons and some coloring sheets during this time. But please greet one another with love as we march towards the cross. And we have tonight this Maundy Thursday service. You'll learn more about what Maundy means later tonight. Thanks for being here. You can greet one another in love. I want it on you.
as you make your way back to your seats, let's grab our hymnals again and turn to number 85. But I know most of y'all won't need your hymnal for this one. Let's sing together. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. And now turn to number 679. We'll sing through all of these verses together. Brother, let me be your servant. Let me be as Christ to you. Pray that I may have the grace to let you be my servant too. We are pilgrims on a journey. We are brothers on the road. We are here to help each other walk the mile and bear the load. I will hold the Christ light for you in the night time of your fear. I will hold my hand out to you, speak the peace you long to hear. I will weep when you are weeping. When you laugh, I'll laugh with you. I will share your joy and sorrow till we've seen this journey through. When we sing to God in heaven, we shall find such harmony servant. Let me be as Christ to you. Pray that I may have the grace to let you be my servant too.
Our scripture tonight is from John chapter 13, verses 1 through 17, and then 31 through 35. Now, before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and to go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who has bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet and put on his robe and had returned to the table, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one example, that you also should do as I have done for you. Truly I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out, and I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." He said this to indicate the kind of death he was to die. The crowd answered him, "We have heard from the law that the Messiah remains forever. How can you say that the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man?" Jesus said to them, "The light is with you a little while longer. Walk while you have light, so that the darkness may not overtake you. If you walk in the darkness, you do not know where you are going." This is the word of the Lord.
You may be seated. I want to say thank you to Wes behind the camera tonight and Pastor Zach, our creative pastor, who has organized us to be able to be on YouTube Live tonight. And thanks to Dr. Riegert and Tamara for helping us with these beautiful hymns. I love when I get to take my kids to a nursing home or an assisted living facility where I get to preach and we get to have the kids sing out of those hymns. And my kids listen to the love of God, not every day, but almost every day. I kind of want to have them have those hymns hidden away in their heart, like some of these scriptures. Tonight, we're looking at John 13. And I'm looking forward to being together with you tonight, all gathered around a table. And it's a dinner table. And for you who have parents whose kids may be talking right now, I want them to talk like they're at a dinner table, like they're at my home. My home is filled with children and now a puppy. So I am used to chaos and some talking when I am telling stories. Sometimes when I'm telling stories, I recognize that maybe my own two kids are not listening to the stories that I'm telling, and perhaps it's you tonight. Perhaps you will, maybe, but I will say this. When you're sitting like this, it's harder to hide behind your cell phone, because if you're on your cell phone tonight, she's going to be looking right at you when you're on your cell phone. So maybe there's something about this sermon in the round that keeps people maybe paying a little bit more attention. And so again, if you happen to be a parent of a Silas or a Hazel or a Georgia, I want them to just enjoy this, because these are the moments that the family of God are gathered together. And it's okay if we're talking a little bit about this, because one of the wonderful things our pastor Lisa Sanders does is she makes faith not about what you're thinking, but about what you're doing. And this is one of those doing services that I want your kids, when they grow up, to remember that this was a night that they perhaps washed the feet or the hands of their parent. And they grow up doing the faith and remembering it perhaps more, rather than our head, but it's in our body, in our hearts, in our hands, and in our feet. So tonight I have a story for you. It's a story of desolation and consolation. It's a story of grace. It's a story of estrangement and reconciliation. And it starts with my pastor. Pastor John has had a variety of different passions to rescue the whole world, to put the world to rights. And he's gathered people around him to help him do that. One of them is Pastor Lisa. And you can see in what Pastor Lisa does on a daily basis. The world is broken, and she's setting the world to rights. She's kind of a team that John puts together. I don't know, I'm not really familiar with the A team, John, but perhaps like that, just gathering people all around the circle to join one another in setting the world to rights. Because as God has set the world to right and set us to rights in his grace and reconciliation, God has tasked us to be able to set the world to rights too. Well, one of the things that your pastor has done is he's taken upon himself to look at the suicide rate for some of our veterans as they returned home, especially from combat. I don't have those stats in front of me, Pastor John, but the suicide rate, especially at home, is very high for some of our veterans who have returned home. And so Pastor John has partnered with a variety of different organizations, but especially the Bethany War Acres American Legion. And Pastor John has sat with some of our veterans who've returned home who might be more likely for self-harm, more likely for mental illness, more likely for difficult times finding a job. And Pastor John has come alongside of some of the friends in ministry to help a population in need. One of those days when Pastor John was in that opportunity to be in friendship with some of those friends that he's created, he heard about a man who'd passed away. And he had wanted to have a funeral, but had no church, had no pastor, and really only had one person in his life that had connected with him. And so Pastor John, in his grace, reached out and said, we have a pastor at our church who would love to do that funeral. Not volunteering himself, but volunteering me. We had a wonderful conversation today at lunch saying, what is it at church that you find difficult to do as a pastor, but meaningful? And John said funerals, which is why I do all the funerals. And I said weddings. And so this has been a joke for 20 years that John marries them and I bury him here at OKC First Church. That's something that we've done for years now. And so John called me on the phone and said, hey, would it be okay for you to do a funeral of somebody that you haven't met yet? Would you be willing to do that? I said, of course. He goes, okay, good, because I've already signed you up to do that. And I was looking forward to these moments, but it was very difficult getting some information about this person and respect for his first and last name, and that this is being viewed on YouTube right now. We're just going to call him the Lonely Veteran. And so Pastor John introduced me to one single man, call him Will, who had reached out in grace at the end of this man's life. So this lonely veteran who was wary of financial institutions and wary of our healthcare system was not feeling well, and he knew something was wrong. And he went to the doctor, and he was diagnosed with a cancer that was incurable, and he was immediately going to be placed upon hospice care. He went into hospice care, and it was a hospice care that was not glamorous, was not nice, was a space that he knew that if he were to live there until he lost his life, he would be without dignity. He had no one to turn to. This lonely veteran had been married a couple of times. He had had a couple of children, but he was estranged from every single person in his life. He had no one to call a friend, no family. And so knowing he was dying alone, he knew he could call the American Legion. It was the people that would have had a chance to surround him at the end of his life. So right around Christmas time, he called the American Legion and he got a hold of Will. Now, Will was on vacation down in Eufaula around Christmas time. And this lonely veteran shared his story with Will and said, can you help me to not die alone? Will left his family vacation in Eufaula and came up to meet the lonely veteran. It's a moment to meet the lonely veteran. And I want to pause the story right now to tell you about our sermon series that's been happening throughout the series of Lent that started almost 40 days ago. It's called Desolation. And the picture that you've seen throughout the sermon series is of closed hands or closed fists. Desolation is mostly understanding as always turned inward, looking upon yourself, not being able to put your eyes above the horizon, and cutting yourself off from community. Over the next 4 days, we are going to be moving from desolation to consolation. Consolation is a posture in our lives that's most vividly seen with open hands, being able to look above the horizon, to see others beyond yourself, and the ability, most of all, to look for one another and community, and to not be alone. So these are the pictures that we're working with and that we're moving toward. Pastor Tamara has written an incredible song called Desolation. And we're moving towards Easter Sunday, which you're going to be able to hear the second part of that song called Consolation. So come on Sunday, waiting for the revelation of what that means in music. Tonight, we're going to explore that through the story. Story of desolation, it's a story of consolation. It's a story of estrangement, it's a story of reconciliation, it's a story of grace. So Will comes up to Oklahoma City and visits the lonely veteran in his hospice bed. And Will, for about the next 30 days, every day, checks in on the lonely veteran, listening to his story, receiving his life in grace. The lonely veteran came to Will that first visit and said, I am not dying here alone in this place without any dignity. I want to go to the best hotel in Oklahoma City, and I'm going to hire 24-hour hospice care. And Will, our good friend from the American Legion at Bethany War Acres, was like, that's a great idea. I love your passion and your hope for this moment, but how are we going to accomplish that? And the lonely veteran said, well, I've heard there's this place up on the northwest side of town called the Waterford, the Mansion at Waterford. I hear that's a nice hotel. I've kind of always wanted to save my life savings and kind of go to a tropical island. Maybe this can be my tropical island. Maybe this is a place that I can die in dignity and grace. And Will from the American Legion, I don't know, we're not swimming in money at the Bethany War Acres American Legion. And he says to him, this is a great dream, but I'm not sure how we're going to accomplish this dream. And the lonely veteran picked up a briefcase, and he opened up that briefcase, and he clicked it open, and there were tens of thousands of dollars in cash. And he said, this is my life saving. I'm not dying here alone. Let's go to the mansion at Waterford, where we're going to check in at $225 a night and have 24-hour hospice care. But I'm not dying here alone without any dignity. Let's go to the mansion at Waterford. So Will takes our lonely veteran and his briefcase full of cash, and he goes to the mansion at Waterford and checks him in for 24-hour hospice care. And over the next 3.5 or so weeks, he was cared with dignity and grace. And about $40,000 later, he'd run out of most of his life savings. And our friend Will at the American Legion began to work out a deal with some of the people at the counter at the Waterford. Can we knock that down from $225 a night more to about $100 a night? That worked out for a few days, and that was good to save some cash. And then at this time, Will, in his own grace, was able to find him a space at a hospital memorial that was able to work with him to be able to receive him in grace after he had run out of most of his life savings. And he checked him in to the hospice house on Memorial. And they cared for him, and they gave him a bath. And Will took a great picture of his friend, the lonely veteran, who he had spent at least part of every day with over about that last month. And he received his story, and he listened to his life, and he heard all who he had been estranged from. And after giving him that bath, later that afternoon, the lonely veteran took his last breath and passed away. And he's telling the story at the American Legion to our pastor, who says we can host a funeral for him. So the day of the funeral comes, and Will, the hero of this story, who had given his life every day to care for someone and listen to a life, comes to us, and he had talked to me about how he wasn't going to share at the funeral. And I think part of it was because he didn't want to be the hero of this story. And he had told me this story. I had tried to get information from him, but I never really was able to get a full story of this funeral we were about to take place in. And just about, 30 seconds before the funeral started, he said, "Do you know what? Would you like me to share part of the story?" And I was like, "Yes, please. Would you please share this story?" And as he shared that story, my heart began to be filled with, I think, grace and consolation and reconciliation. Because Will's voice would always choke up and crack when he talked about how the lonely veteran was estranged from every single person in his life. And so I got up to preach, and I'm you guys know me. For those of you who don't know me, welcome. My name's Jason, but I'm a pretty scripted out kind of guy. I kind of like things organized and the way they are, and I'm not a big fan of surprises. That sound right? And so I am about to stand up and preach a message I'd about to prepare about someone who I knew nothing about, but just 20 minutes earlier, got the fullness of his life story. And I was able to stand up and look out to a crowd. Now, John and I thought there were going to be only about 4 or 5 of us. But somehow KOC05 had gotten a hold of the story, and someone on Facebook, and different veterans from kind of all over Oklahoma City, especially the American Legion, began to file in and sit in the pews so that veteran would not have a funeral where he was all alone in complete desolation. And as these veterans began to fill our pews, my heart began to fill about maybe a message that God had for us in that moment at that funeral. And I began to speak, and it was one of those moments where I was like, there must be the Spirit speaking through me, because this is not on the script, and I like to stick to the script. And as I began to preach a message to these courageous veterans, and I called them out of desolation into consolation. I said to them, the only people in this room who are not veterans are myself and Pastor John. You've all done things that you probably cannot describe, and courageous things that you've heard a story today about a man who was estranged from every single person in his life. And I looked out of veterans who'd gathered to support a brother in arms. And I said, I want to call you to something, maybe the most courageous thing you can do. I want to call you to be willing to have the courage to move from estrangement to reconciliation. Because as someone who has done over 125 funerals the last 21 years as a minister of the gospel here at Oklahoma City First Church of the Nazarene, the number one regret I hear at every single funeral are people who have been estranged from a family member that has then passed away. The most awkward conversations the last 20 years I've been here are at funerals when someone says, "We don't talk to this side of the family," or "We don't talk to this family member." When they describe to me the stories of pain and estrangement. And as I'm telling this story, Will is in tears. And he says, you're right, tears running down his face as I talk about estrangement. Because he had sat every day for over 30 days with a man hearing a story of no family and no friends and estranged from everyone. And I looked out on this crowd of veterans with tears in the eyes of most of these very strong and manly and courageous men, with tears in their eyes at this moment, as I say, you have done very, very many incredible, courageous things, but I'm calling you to one more before you die. Might you reach towards an enemy? Might you reach towards someone who you are estranged from? Might you move from desolation to the opportunity to move into an open-handed reconciliation and consolation? Might you, in the middle of this, perhaps God's called you to this funeral, perhaps God's called you online right now, perhaps God has called you in this circle to hear that you can through the grace and power of Jesus Christ, because of the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ, move from estrangement to reconciliation. There is hope for peace. There is hope for grace. There is hope for reunification. There is hope for reconciliation. Now, I'm going to say that there's some asterisks for that. Pastor John and I always talk about if there's abuse in a relationship that's going to be harmful for both the victim and the victimizer, then we need to maybe talk to a therapist or your pastor about making sure that there's some significant boundaries in some of those areas. I think that's an appropriate asterisk for this moment. And I think that there are some moments in some relationships, especially with some mental health issues, where toxic relationships are difficult for those in your life. So this isn't a go reach out to that person who will hurt you, perhaps, or go reach out to that person who has victimized you. But I hope that you can hear within the discernment of this message, like my veteran friends who gathered that day, with tears in their eyes, hearing a message that we hear tonight in John 13, which is of a man named Jesus who gathers with a group of friends, one who just moments later is about to betray him. And we can't read the scriptures without knowing that there's something about enemy love that makes the gospel come to life and makes the gospel true. That enemy love is what makes the gospel go round. And Pastor Steve Green, the pastor who was a pastor here and a mentor to Pastor Steve and I, would always say, the gospel meets the road as you love your enemies. And so, do you think I wanted to preach this message tonight? Of course not. Who wants to be the pastor that says, get up? Who wants to be the pastor that says, that person you hate, love them? Who wants to be the pastor that says, that family member you haven't reached out to for 20 years because of that hurt, you should move towards reconciliation? No pastor, especially the pastor likes to be liked, wants to come to you and say, hey, could you dream and imagine what your life would be like if you could move from closed fists to open hands? Because how are we transformed? We are transformed by relationships. We are transformed by love. We are transformed by grace. We are transformed by one another. We are transformed by the practices that place us on the night he was betrayed. When Jesus gives us a new command, a new mandate, and that's where the word Maundy comes from. This new mandate that you love one another as I have loved you. Now, I know we have Dr. Tashton and Pastor Lisa Sanders here, but for the most of us, sorry, that's a little bit of a joke to you. Have you loved Jesus perfectly in your life? Because I know I haven't. I'm sure Pastor Lisa and Pastor Tashton know their own faults, but I don't know if many of us have seen them. But the rest of you, have you loved Jesus with your whole heart in all times and spaces? I have not. And Pastor Lisa and Dr. Tashton, I know you haven't either. We all have not loved God the way that God has loved us. But on the night he was betrayed, he took this basin of water. And just like Pastor John said on Sunday, when he read from the passage in Philippians 2, Jesus empties himself and takes the form of a slave, being found in human likeness, and he washes the disciples' feet, taking a posture of love and service and grace, no matter what, even to one who's going to betray him. And I think that Jesus takes these simple tools and transforms them into a means of grace. He takes bread and he takes cup. He takes water and he takes a towel. And he allows these simple tools of the culture to become a means of grace to transform lives and relationships, giving us the example and the mandate to love one another as I have loved you. And so tonight we're invited to the table. Tonight we're invited to imagine or dream or begin to think, What would my life be like if I moved from estrangement to reconciliation? I'm not saying that has to happen tonight, but what I'm saying is that perhaps Jesus Christ tonight in this message can give you the imagination that it could be possible. The imagination that life can be different. The imagination that peace is possible. The imagination that estrangement can wash away before you die. And you can you believe it? Can you imagine it? Move towards reconciliation and consolation. So tonight we get opportunities to practice that. In a moment, I'm going to invite Pastor John and Pastor Kristen here to take bread and cup. And I'm also going to invite Dexter and Avarilla on this space here, as you will navigate your own space to come for Eucharist on the night he was betrayed. If you would rather not partake in intinction, we have these communion cups that will be able to be present as well. I'm going to ask Mr. Jurgensen if you'd place that on the table behind me, perhaps. It would be a good space for that. And as you look around the room, you can see that there are many different options. We have 18 different spaces for either foot washing or hand washing. Now, full disclosure, I like to keep shoes and socks on. It's been 5 years since we've had a foot washing service. That might have been a little bit on purpose. I got to thank you over here. Thank you very much. As I speak to the camera, some of you may have stayed at home because you thought, if I come, am I going to be asked to take off my shoes and socks and a stranger's going to wash my feet? Amen, hallelujah, brother and sister. I almost joined you at home to preach from Zoom because I got to tell you, there's just something about the idea that someone would wash your feet. You're just like, no thanks. Anybody in the back want to say amen? I remember a year that I took off my shoes and socks, and I think Katie may have said, I don't think I've seen you without shoes and socks in public in history. And I think it's true. As my kids will say, I don't take off my shoes and socks until I am going to bed. It comes from being the son of my father, who at some point may watch this sermon, but maybe not. But my dad was so modest, my dad would mow the yawn in slacks. So yeah, that's another story for another time. I want you to, if you want to do that though, especially for some of you who perhaps have a child here, and you want to tonight have them maybe remember as they get older that mom and dad wash their feet and let them wash their feet. But don't let it just be for kids. I want some of you to have the courage to wash one another's feet as an example of grace, as an example of love. And can you think of something more vulnerable in consolation than letting somebody wash your feet? But for those of you who are like me, we have 4 stations back here and a station over here specifically to make it easier for you for hand washing. Now, we've washed a lot of our hands over the last 2.5 years. Remember in the early days of March 2 years ago when everyone was singing happy birthday twice while they're washing their hands? I must admit and confess, I don't wash my hands as long as I do in April of 2022 as I did in March of 2020. But you've washed a lot of your hands over the last 2 years, and perhaps tonight, if you're not really into taking off your shoes and socks and letting someone wash your feet, tonight you can have somebody pour water over your hands and dry your hands with a towel or a cloth as a moment of grace to open up your life to say, I want to move from desolation to consolation. And I will say this, when you ask somebody to wash your hands, you don't do this. When you ask somebody to wash your hands, or when you wash your own hands, nobody turns on the faucet and goes like this. You turn on the faucet and you open your hands and you let the water fall, and may grace and reconciliation and the comfort of God wash over your hands as a symbol of love and grace and hospitality and the imagination that life could be different. An imagination that you can move from desolation to consolation, and the imagination that you perhaps can move from estrangement to reconciliation. And so on the night he was betrayed, Jesus took bread and he broke it, and he gave it to his disciples, saying, take and eat, and do this in remembrance of me. And on that same night, he took the cup, and after giving thanks, he redefined the cup as the new covenant in his blood given for the remission of sins, saying, "Take and drink in remembrance of me." When our communion servers come here in just a moment, and Katie, would you mind to give them some hand sanitizer as they make their way to the table? And Dr. Mark, could you begin to just play however God leads you to play? I want you to come to the table. For those of you on this side, you can come to a space over here. For those of you who are on this space, you can come to those who are serving here. And after that, you can take your seat. Mark's going to be playing for a little while. But you also have a space to go to any of these stations. There's actually 2 in the hallway behind us. I was going to do it space. Or I was going to do it, but there was a line, so I had to leave. I did not. You should have space. There will be space for you if you choose this tonight to be able to wash these moments. For a friend, if you would like to find me, I would love to in these moments ask you to wash my hands, and I would wash your hands. I don't want anybody to feel like if they are here and they're not right next to a friend, that they would not have that opportunity. I'll be in that hallway over here. And if you'd like to approach me for that opportunity, I would love to do that. And so I'm going to say a prayer, and when I say amen, as the elements have already been blessed, I want to go ahead and have those servers come and Katie come at this time so they can prepare their space. And as soon as you take Eucharist, you are dismissed if you would like to be. There's not going to be an official benediction. But as soon as you are done in these moments, you can go to any station around the sanctuary for an opportunity for feet washing or for hand washing. I think I've got lots of water and lots of towels and lots of basins. And so if you're like me, you're kind of disappointed because I always kind of look for that excuse or that out, or I was going to do it, but no, there's a line. I can't wait. Tried to make sure that there wasn't a line. And so let me pray as Mark plays and as you get a chance to be invited to the table. My hope is that the very Spirit of God is able to touch you tonight in grace, moving us all with a great imagination from desolation to consolation. Would you pray with me? Jesus, we ask that you would bless these elements and transform them into a means of grace, a means of your love and your forgiveness, and that God, tonight our imagination would be captured by your love in the way that you have loved us, that we might love one another. And God, you would give us imagination for our futures, of what it would mean for your grace and your word to move us from estrangement to reconciliation. God, we thank you for this night, for your grace, for your presence, and we ask that you would bless these moments with your loving Spirit. It's in your name we pray. Amen. When you are ready, you can come to the table.